Oh god! The Nobus! There are too many of them! Help! Hello and welcome back to Otaku Daikun. Dai here. Today's video has been brought to you by $50 patron Lee Goldberg, who requested that I make the lore of Fate Grand Order's GudaGuda events. In the Japanese version, there are a total of 7 events by the time of making this video. 6 of those are available in the North American release, so I'll be covering those across the span of 2 videos. Shin Yamataikoku and whatever else comes out will have to wait for a 3rd video, assuming there's a demand. My poor brain can only handle so much of this at a time. Before we get started, I want to remind you that I've got a partnership with anime figure store Entertainment Earth. Use my affiliate link to get 10% off all in-stock items and free US shipping on orders $79 and up. Today, I recommend this affordable Housekeeper Mashu, and on the more premium end, this Summer Artoria Ruler. Check out the links in my description. Also, don't forget that I've got my very own Dai-chan Dakimakura. You can order it right now from Cuddly Octopus using a link in the description. Without further ado, let's start this off by asking, what the hell's a GudaGuda? Well, to put it bluntly, the GudaGuda events are a collaboration with the spin-off of a spin-off. If you've ever been confused by this, I don't blame you. It all began with the artist Kei Kenichi, who started a parody manga called Koha Ace. I'm sure you recognize the art style. It's a silly comic series featuring Fate and Tsukihime characters playing out various skits. About 3 years later, Kei Kenichi would start a spin-off to Koha Ace titled Fate Koha Ace. It features a more cohesive narrative focused on Japanese servants fighting in their own universe's Holy Grail Wars. In terms of Type Moon's overall multiverse, these stories all take place in separate timelines labeled as the world of GudaGuda. The name GudaGuda is, as far as I understand, the combination of a pun and an inside joke. Before the name Ritsuka Fujimaru was used for Fate Grand Order's protagonist, they were given the nicknames Gudao or Gudako depending on gender. The phrase GudaGuda in Japanese basically translates to messy, which is quite fitting for the ridiculous hijinks that ensue. A lot of fans are excited by the spin-off called Fate Type Redline, which is a much more serious adaptation of Fate Koha Ace. While that's certainly cool, our focus this time will be on Koha Ace specifically. To clarify, while some Fate works, such as Fate Apocrypha, are stories that branch off from the Stay Night timeline, the world of GudaGuda has its own history. Think of it like a separate cluster of timelines that diverge from the stuff we see in the rest of Fate. The main takeaway is that there are 2 rivals that face off during Fate Koha Ace, those being Oda Nobunaga and Okita Soji. We'll encounter them, as well as servants from all across Japanese history. Therefore, I feel the best place to start is by giving a very basic overview of the eras that GudaGuda parodies. We can save Yamataikoku for later, which is mostly ancient Japan before the Common Era. We'll also be skipping the Heian period, which featured Raiko and her 4 heavenly kings, and later Ushiwakamaru and the Genpei War between the Minamoto and Taira clans. That period gets plenty of coverage in other Fate stories. For today, though, you'll definitely need to understand the Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period. This refers to the turbulent state of Japan between the years 1467 and 1615. During this 148-year span, Japan lacked a functioning central government. The emperor during this time was no more than a figurehead. Instead, it had opposing warlords constantly fighting over territory. The previous shogunate had collapsed during the Onin War, allowing other clans to vie for power. This period is when Oda Nobunaga lived. Historically, Nobunaga is a man, but in the world of GudaGuda, she was born a woman. She was known for being perhaps the most prominent warlord during this time, gathering military strength through early adoption of firearms. This allowed her to dominate the land and nearly unify the country. Nobunaga's rise to power made her many enemies, leading to an all-out war against the Takeda clan. Many feared her as the Devil King of the Sixth Heaven, signifying how she was a destroyer of Shinto and Buddhism. It's based on the burning of Hiei, an incident in which Nobunaga razed a mountain temple to the ground in order to suppress a group of warrior monks. None of her direct enemies could stop her, but eventually, her reign came to an end through betrayal. Prior to launching a westward invasion, Nobunaga stayed at the temple of Honnoji. During this lodging, she had little protection, allowing her subordinate, a samurai named Akechi Mitsuhide, to surround the temple with his men and set it on fire. Unable to escape, Nobunaga and her attendant, Mori Ranmaru, committed seppuku amidst the flames. When Nobunaga's quest came to an end, power then slipped downward to her retainers Tokugawa Ieyasu and Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Tension rose between these two clans, with the Toyotomi ultimately being defeated. We'll get to that later. Ieyasu would battle the remaining Toyotomi loyalists in the Battle of Sekigahara, with his victory ushering in a new era, the Edo period. This lasted from 1603 to 1868, with the Tokugawa shogunate ruling Japan from its capital, Edo, or modern-day Tokyo. Compared to the Sengoku period, the Edo was much more peaceful, but across its 265-year span, new conflict emerged as Japan was introduced to Western powers. To protect and preserve Tokugawa rule, an organization named the Shinsengumi policed Kyoto. That is where Okita comes in. Yet again, historical Okita Soji was a man, but she's born in GudaGuda worlds as a woman. Okita Soji was famous for being captain of the Shinsengumi's first unit. She was active towards the era's end, also known as the Bakumatsu, during which she mastered the Tennen Rishin Ryu sword style. While she was humble, her superiors in the Shinsengumi revered her skills and relied on her as both a protector of the peace and a ruthless assassin of the shogunate's enemies. These enemies came from various factions, but they would more or less unite to form Japan's imperial court. With Western trade coming from Commodore Perry and the Dutch East India Company, Japan was given a taste of the outside world. There was a growing fear that, unless Japan could modernize and adapt, they would be conquered by foreign nations. In the face of this, however, the Tokugawa shogunate was resistant to change, prompting Japanese imperialists to rebel. It all came to a head during the Boshin War, where Okita hoped to fight alongside her fellow officers, but was forced to opt out of the conflict due to health concerns. She had tuberculosis, which ultimately claimed her life during treatment. By the war's end, the Tokugawa family was overthrown by the imperialist court, ushering in the Meiji period, or Meiji Restoration. Many believed it was necessary for Japan to be receptive to foreign influence. Samurai lost out most to this. With power returning to the emperor, samurai were forced to give up their land and influence. It even became illegal to carry a sword around in public. In their place came Japan's own Industrial Revolution. During Japan's brief Taisho period, there was a push toward democracy. After that, Emperor Showa would rule the country in a nationalistic direction right through World War II. Japan surrendered in 1945, after which the nation was occupied and forced to reform. This is all basically the same for both Fate and GudaGuda timelines. With that history lesson out of the way, we can finally discuss Fate Koha Ace's plot. Its prelude tells the story of a Third Holy Grail War, during which the Imperial Japanese Army summons Oda Nobunaga as an archer servant. With her aid, they claimed the Grail and decided to use it as the core of a new type of bomb, the 81st Holy Grail bomb to be specific. The army made it to protect Japan during World War II, but conflict emerged with the arrival of mages from Germany's Third Reich. This kicks off a Fourth Holy Grail War. Nobunaga remains a servant from the Third into the Fourth War, where she encounters Okita as her rival. Poor little Okita's wish upon the Grail is for the chance to finally fight till the end, which she couldn't do in life due to her illness. To differentiate her from all the other Saber faces, she was nicknamed Sakura Saber. Overall, this Fourth Grail War is called the Imperial Capital Holy Grail Strange Story, and strange is putting it lightly. Honestly, it's a stretch to say that Fate Koha Ace even has much of a plot. Redline is gonna have to do a lot of heavy lifting. So what does Fate Grand Order have to do with this? Well, basically, the GudaGuda events are essentially an expanded retelling of Fate Koha Ace. They retread some of the same elements, but in far more detail. These events result from a timeline that deviates from Fate Koha Ace and starts interacting with FGO's timeline instead. Sometime during the Fourth Holy Grail War of Fate Koha Ace, Nobunaga accidentally creates a new singularity while trying to turn the Grail into a bomb, like I mentioned earlier. She falls into the bomb's reactor, and the resulting singularity is influenced by her subconscious. Chaldea detects this singularity when one of its byproducts, these strange little miniature Nobus, start appearing in the facility. This was back when we still had Dr. Roman commanding us. He and Da Vinci try to analyze the mini-Nobus and discover the presence of what they call GudaGuda particles. These particles appear when aspects of the GudaGuda worlds interact with other universes, and they manipulate servants' abilities and memories in mysterious ways. In other words, the GudaGuda events make no sense, do whatever they want, and we've just gotta deal with it. Anyway, the singularity Nobunaga made is absolutely swarming with these mini-Nobus. While they were once enemies, Nobunaga and Okita instead decide to team up to hunt the little bastards. They pursue one of the Nobus, which leads them to Chaldea, where they meet Ritsuka and Mashu. We all agree that the singularity is a problem, forming a united front to resolve it. Good thing that's kind of our specialty. This first adventure, GudaGuda Hanoji, is like walking through a fever dream of Nobunaga's life. Other completely unrelated servants are brainwashed by the GudaGuda particles into acting out the roles of different warlords during the Sengoku period. I hate when FGO does this crap, just like the Journey to the West event, because if you don't already know these historical figures, none of the jokes make any sense. If you're hoping to learn about them, then the jokes make it hard to tell what's even legitimate mythology. Thankfully, the events get much better once we actually start seeing new servants properly introduced. In a very self-aware cliché, we discover that there are actually two Nobunagas here. They somehow split into good and bad halves when the singularity formed, so now we've got to defeat the evil version to merge the two halves together. Bad Nobu reveals her noble phantasm, Demon King of the Sixth Heaven, which is a reality marble that invokes people's fear of her to create a fiery hellscape. We kick her ass, which causes the singularity to vanish. As thanks for helping out, Nobunaga and Okita agree to be summoned for future battles. However, they seem to bring more trouble than they fix, leading Mashu to kick them out. With nowhere else to go, all the GudaGuda servants wind up squatting in Chaldea's boiler room. Our second GudaGuda event is where things get more serious. It's the Meiji Restoration event, which introduces us to Nobunaga's relatives Cha-Cha and Nobukatsu. Cha-Cha, also referred to as Yodo Dono, was Nobunaga's niece. She was the daughter of daimyo Azai Nagamasa and Nobu's sister Oichi. Her life consisted of 3 fallen castles claimed by warfare. For the first time, her father was killed in battle. For the second, her mother died. As I said before, following Nobunaga's death, power went to both Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu. Of the two, Ieyasu ultimately gained a dominant position, creating tension with the Toyotomi clan. During this time, Cha-Cha became Hideyoshi's second wife, bearing his son, Toyotomi Hideyori. Eventually, Hideyoshi passed away, and when the clan's authority shifted to his son, rumors spread that the Toyotomi clan had gotten weak. Through political marriages, they could have been absorbed by the Tokugawa, but Cha-Cha kept her family's pride alive. Hoping to confirm the rumors, Ieyasu met with Cha-Cha's son and actually perceived him as a dire threat. Sure enough, Hideyori had been gathering armed forces in Osaka. To prevent war between the clans, Cha-Cha was advised to become a hostage, but she refused. Her choice resulted in Osaka Castle being invaded and torched. This third castle would mark her demise. Much like her aunt, Cha-Cha and her son passed away while committing seppuku within the flames. Even though it was Hideyori who provoked Ieyasu, Cha-Cha has gone down in history as the cause of the Toyotomi's end. Our next singularity results, in part, from the shame Cha-Cha felt during her death. For FGO's timeline, this event occurs after the defeat of Gaetia. While much of him perished at the Temple of Time, various demon god pillars escaped to form the Epic of Remnant chapters. Of these god pillars, Andras, on the verge of death, sensed Cha-Cha's shame, guiding him to Japan. In his final moments, Andras called out to souls who yearned to survive, and utilized them to create a singularity where he could shelter them eternally. One of the servants to take the bait was Oda Nobukatsu, Nobunaga's little brother. Both Nobukatsu and Nobunaga had a pleasant childhood. Nobukatsu in particular valued those carefree days. However, that bliss came to an end when it was time to decide who would take over as the Oda clan's leader. The clan's elders rejected Nobunaga for being a girl, and instead placed their hopes onto the younger sibling. Mind you, when I introduce these servants, they just so happen to be the versions from the world of GudaGuda, not proper human history. Nobukatsu, who loved his sister dearly, was pressured into mobilizing an army and ultimately confronting her in battle. He was an intelligent, strategic general, but that wasn't enough to claim victory. After 2 separate attacks, he was slain by his dear sister. On his deathbed, Nobukatsu chose to entrust Nobunaga with the Oda clan's future. In the grand scheme of things, he was only a footnote in Nobunaga's reign, but he was still able to hear Andras' summoning. While not a proper heroic spirit, he manifested in the Meiji Singularity and agreed to help Andras in order to free his sister from the Oda clan. That way, the two of them could continually enjoy the harmony they felt as children. To that end, Nobukatsu resented his clan, as well as the entire Sengoku for Nobunaga's sake. All of this is relevant to the Sengoku Jidai, so why is this singularity based on the Meiji Restoration? Well, our third servant might have something to do with that. Hijikata Toshizo lived during that time as the vice commander of the Shinsengumi, effectively making him Okita's boss. Known as the Demon Vice Commander, he devoted himself to the cause and strictly upheld the group's policies. Due to the danger of this position, he cut ties with his current and former lovers for their protection. Even though the Shinsengumi are often celebrated in the modern era, they were on the losing side of the Boshin War. During the fall of the shogunate, the Shinsengumi split, with some integrating with the new government and others being executed for war crimes. Refusing to give up in the face of inevitable failure, Hijikata and his men continued to fight their last in the Battle of Hakodate, where he was shot in the lower back and killed. Hoping to continue the fight, Hijikata's soul resonated with Andras, causing him to be summoned as a Berserker-class servant. That said, in his enraged state, he doesn't even realize he actually died. The singularity took on his vision of the continued battle, making him a key component in maintaining it. Even though Andras was responsible for reaching out to Hijikata, the two found themselves incompatible. Their visions of an eternal future were at odds. In order to stay alive, Andras needed to inhabit a heroic spirit, and since neither Hijikata nor Nobukatsu would work, he summoned Cha-Cha to the very singularity she unintentionally inspired. With her last memory being of the fire at Osaka Castle, she thought she'd been brought to hell. Andras told Cha-Cha that history accused her of destroying the Toyotomi, when in truth, she believed her actions would save it. Thus, when Andras tried to fuse with her, she fled, somehow escaping the singularity to reach Chaldea. Doing so brings with her a swarm of GudaGuda particles and mini Nobus, so of course we've got to cut this off at the source. The bulk of this singularity is a war between Nobukatsu and Hijikata. While impersonating his sister, Nobukatsu decides to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate and rename it the Oda shogunate. Hijikata, in turn, reestablishes the Shinsengumi, or Nobu-sengumi, to vanquish the Oda. Ritsuka follows Cha-Cha back into the singularity, along with Okita and Nobunaga. There, we wind up choosing which of the two factions to side with. In either case, the conflict escalates when Nobukatsu reveals he's working for Andras, who is going by the alias Great Gold Demon Taiko. He kidnaps Cha-Cha and brings her to a golden castle. Andras tries to forcibly fuse with Cha-Cha, but we come to the rescue. Nobunaga confronts Nobukatsu like they did in life, but this time, she chooses to spare her brother, recognizing Andras as the true threat. With the demon god defeated, Nobukatsu vanishes, as it was Andras who was keeping his spirit origin intact. However, the singularity has yet to disappear because Hijikata is still maintaining it. He realizes that, until he dies, the singularity will remain eternal. Thus, he challenges Okita to a duel over whose vision for the Shinsengumi is ideal. Of course, Okita's always been the stronger fighter, so she wins. Finally, Hijikata accepts his death, agreeing to fight in any battlefield he gets summoned to in the future. It seems Andras' shenanigans manifested enough power to make a pseudo-grail, which Cha-Cha brings back to Chaldea as a gift for Ritsuka. So now we have 2 more GudaGuda servants. To the boiler room with ye! Our third GudaGuda event, Legend of the Imperial Capital Grail, is the result of Nobunaga's nemesis Akechi Mitsuhide, the man who betrayed her at Honnoji. Turns out, at least in the world of GudaGuda, Akechi was actually obsessed with Nobunaga, worshipping her as an idol of sorts. He claimed to love her, but went insane from envy as Nobunaga praised other generals, such as Toyotomi Hideyoshi, more than him. Because of this, he despised Hideyoshi and convinced himself that Nobunaga wasn't real. You see, he had a vision of Nobunaga in his mind, an idealized Nobu that he desperately believed in. This is why he betrayed Nobunaga in life, and as a heroic spirit, he tries to actually summon his ideal Nobu. To do so, he transformed Tokyo into a singularity, and within, he held various Holy Grail wars so that he could gather the spirit origins of fallen servants. While he designed these Grail wars to be a territory struggle between masterless servants, in truth, he rigged it so that he secretly controlled everything from the shadows. No matter who won any particular war, he would reap the benefits. Eventually, this Grail he constructed summoned our Nobunaga, but she rejected Akechi's obsessed devotion and sought to put an end to this ritual. To avoid becoming Akechi's pawn, Nobunaga separated part of her spirit origin and took shelter within her brother's incomplete one. Thus, the Nobukatsu in this singularity is actually housing our Nobunaga. Sadly, the part of her spirit origin that remained decides to fight in the war. This incomplete version of Nobunaga is referred to as Kaiser Nobunaga. I'm not exactly sure how much mana this guy needs to pull this off, but it should go without saying that stockpiling the servants from multiple Grail Wars is ambitious, enough so that the counterforce targets the singularity for elimination. It summons a couple of servants to participate in the most recent war. One of them is the pair Sakamoto Ryoma and his wife Oryo. During the Bakumatsu, Ryoma supported the Imperialists, playing a major role in ushering in the new era. He grew up as a low-ranking samurai who wanted to help his fellow villagers. This aspiration grew into him trying to benefit the country as a whole. Despite being a master of the Hokushin Ito-ryu sword style, he focused on diplomacy over combat, establishing an organization called the Kameyama Shachu, or Kaientai. It dealt with the selling of weapons, which helped in forming an alliance between Choshu and Satsuma. This Sacho alliance was critical in overthrowing the shogunate, which of course gained Ryoma many enemies. In the face of attempts on his life, he would continue to innovate until he was finally assassinated at the age of 33. So what's with this floating girl by his side? That would be Oryo, the great white snake of Takachiho. This legend, as far as I can tell, is completely original to the world of GudaGuda. Oryo was once a small, black aberration born in a distant land. She had aspirations of becoming a dragon, specifically an Orochi, but was instead shunned. Eventually, she floated onto the shores of Japan and took her anger out on its people. She devoured them to grow much stronger. She arrogantly reached for the heavens and was punished by being impaled on Mount Takachiho with a divine lance known as the Ama no Sakahoko. In life, Sakamoto Ryoma would come across Oryo and feel sorry for her imprisonment. Ignoring whatever evil deeds she committed, not even considering she might eat him, he pulled out the spear and set her free. Sure enough, Oryo did plan to deceive and consume Ryoma, but upon seeing his selfless compassion, she fell in love with him instead. Ever since, the two were inseparable, with the one exception being when Ryoma was killed. As a servant, Ryoma is the main Saint Graf, with Oryo being a human manifestation of his noble phantasm, which invokes her dragon form. As I said though, this legend doesn't carry over to proper human history, or even the other Fate timelines. In actual history, Ryoma married a woman named Narasaki Ryo, who is often referred to as Oryo, but she was a normal human being. The spear, Ama no Sakahoko, plays a different role in other Fate works. In truth, this lance is supposed to be a unity between the separate spears used by the gods Izanagi and Izanami. It was used in Japan's creation myth, with the two gods wielding it to churn the earth from primordial chaos. It remains on the mountain as a symbol of welcoming humans to the heavens. Eris Utsumi from Fate Requiem uses a duplicate of the spear created through magecraft. The reason this obscure legend is tied to Ryoma in reality is that, on a honeymoon trip with his human wife, he pulled out the lance to try and impress her. Basically, the Ryoma we see in GudaGuda, and by extension FGO as a whole, is a romanticized historical fiction that conflicts with proper human history. Nonetheless, he is summoned along with the serpent Oryo as a rider servant, tasked with stopping Akechi's singularity. As a participant in the latest Grail War, he operates out of a detective agency, preferring to use his mind over his blade. The other servant summoned by the counterforce is Okita Altar, which, as the name implies, is a version of Okita from another world, one that differs from the Okita we've come to know by this point. This Okita was born prematurely and was about to die because of it. Her sister, however, prayed for Okita's survival, and the counterforce responded to those prayers. It saved Okita's life in exchange for making her a counter-guardian. Now, with this singularity, it's finally time for her to make do on that arrangement. She is to dedicate her existence to eradicating Akechi and his grail. Strangely, however, she is summoned to the singularity without her memories, combat skills, or her ability to speak. She has to learn these things from the ground up. That's not to say she can't fight at all, but rather she's just not at her full potential. Given that this singularity has gotten the counterforce's attention, it's no surprise that Caldea would decide to send in Ritsuka. We ray-shift there to find the mini-Nobus massacring citizens. Right out of the gate, we encounter Kaiser Nobunaga, who shoots us. Okita Alter comes to our rescue, fending off Nobu until we get backup from Sakamoto Ryoma and Oryo. They help us escape, and luckily our bullet wound isn't critical. After introducing himself, Ryoma takes us to his detective agency and fills us in on the state of the war. By this point, Okita Alter has learned to speak again, but without her memories, she finds it hard to believe she's the legendary Okita Soji. Our discussion of the war is interrupted when a new servant comes to attack. It is Okada Izo, one of the 4 great manslayers of the Bakumatsu. In life, both Izo and Ryoma were part of the Tosa Imperialism Party, which was under the leadership of Takechi Zuizan. Izo in particular served as an imperialist assassin and bodyguard. He practiced a number of sword styles, such as the Onoha Ito style, Kyoshin Meichiri style, and Jikishi style. This lasted until the Tosa Party's decline. Ryoma decided to leave the group, and Izo took this as a betrayal. With the shogunate on their tail, Izo was forced to go into hiding, but he was eventually captured. They tortured him to confess to his killings, and as punishment, they severed his head and put it on public display. As a servant, Izo sees Ryoma as a traitor to their cause, and aims to take revenge upon him. As we fight, the normal Okita Soji arrives. She's been summoned as the war's official saber, and is surprised to see her alter here. Despite our friendship, she seems more interested in defending her territory in the war, making her our enemy. This calms the tension between Ryoma and Izo, and to make amends, Ryoma allows Izo to slice him through. It's not a killing blow, but it does help Izo take out his anger, allowing the two to become allies once more. In order to dismantle this singularity, we decide to participate in the war by defeating the other servants at their respective territories. Our first stop is Lancer's territory, where we defeat Li Shuin. After that, we target Okita's land, where Okita Alter duels her in earnest. The fight reawakens Okita Alter's memories, and she becomes stronger than ever. In response, regular Okita dons her Shinsengumi's Code of Oaths and makes one final effort. Ultimately, however, it is Alter who wins, and it's almost as though Okita was trying to train her other self to go on and claim the Grail. Meanwhile, Ryoma gets attacked by Hijikata, who is summoned as the war's berserker. After getting past him, Ryoma finds and picks a fight with Kaiser Nobu. Apparently, Kaiser Nobunaga has made an agreement with Akechi Mitsuhide, mistaking him for the war's caster. The two are supposed to work together, with the Grail going to Kaiser Nobu, but that was just Akechi's ploy to take advantage of her. Instead, Akechi injures Kaiser and takes her hostage for his ritual. Through her body, he can summon his ideal Nobunaga. From a distance, the other Nobunaga, who resides in Nobukatsu St. Graph, watches the struggle and heads to the detective bureau to inform Ritsuka of what's happened. In order to stop Akechi's plan, Nobukatsu leads us to the Magus facility where the Grail is being made. There, we face off against Akechi, and Izo stabs him through, allowing our Nobunaga to reform with Kaiser Nobunaga. When it becomes clear that Nobu won't ever accept his ideal vision, Akechi decides to use the Grail on himself, transforming into a massive mud creature. Why make a Nobu when you can become the Nobu? Anyway, he's our final boss. Okita Alter mentions she can finish the job if we can get the Grail out of Akechi's chest. Thus, Nobunaga and Ryoma combine their noble phantasms, creating an opening for Izo to snag the Grail. With the Grail in hand, Okita Alter transports Ritsuka, Akechi, and herself into an infinite void. There, Okita Alter defeats Akechi once and for all, declaring that his true intention this whole time was to atone for killing Nobunaga in life. This fulfills Okita Alter's contract with the Counterforce, causing her to vanish. The Magus facility explodes, dismantling the singularity. While it seemed like everyone died, Ritsuka returns to Caldea to find that Ryoma, Oryo, and Okita Alter have been summoned as proper Chaldean servants. Nobukatsu also manages to remain, despite not having a complete Saint Graph. The boiler room just got a lot more crowded. This event has an epilogue where Cha-Cha throws a tantrum for not getting to participate. She uses Caldea's data on the recent excursion to form a Toyotomi army that we need to defeat. After more tedious fights, we slay her and her minions, though it's not like there's any real punishment for putting us through this mess. The fourth GudaGuda event, misleadingly titled Final Honoji, occurs during FGO's Cosmos in the Lost Belt arc. This is when Ritsuka and Caldea's main crew are chased out of their original base and eventually take refuge in the Wandering Sea, where Sion Eltnam Sakaris builds us a new base. She's a member of the Atlas sect, which specializes in making powerful superweapons. One of those weapons is Logos React, a Spiritron computer that can simulate various realities. Zepia, the leader of Atlas, once gave Sion a smaller copy of the superweapon called Logos React Generic. This device is incomplete, and essentially gets so bogged down by its simulations that they expand to form actual singularities. One time, while simulating the Sengoku Jidai, Logos React Generic malfunctioned due to the presence of a Holy Grail, resulting in its simulation becoming a full-blown singularity. Within, there's a figure named the High Priest Makuzu, who wanted to bring peace to Japan by slaying Nobunaga. He got his hands on the Grail that corrupted the simulation, and used it to summon the caster-class servant known as Maxwell's Demon. Rather than being based on a legend, Maxwell's Demon is actually a thought experiment introduced by physicist James Clerk Maxwell. The second law of thermodynamics states that heat always flows spontaneously from hotter to colder regions, and does so until reaching thermal equilibrium. For instance, if you heat up a cup of coffee, we know that the coffee's temperature will decrease over time as heat evaporates into the surrounding air. In fact, it never would have gotten hot in the first place without an external source of energy, and it can't perpetually store that energy. Even if you poured that coffee into a closed thermos, it would eventually cool through the same process. Likewise, a machine can't work at perfect efficiency. A heat engine, for instance, can't just recycle that heat forever. Maxwell here imagined a scenario where a demon controlled the flow of atoms between two chambers, such that hot particles would continue moving towards cold ones without ever mixing. This is a type of perpetual motion machine, which cannot exist in reality. As a servant, then, Maxwell's demon is the conceptual embodiment of infinite energy. By manifesting his noble phantasm, he can create a machine that generates something close to infinite mana. Makuzu and his followers, the Cult of Max, worshipped this noble phantasm like a god. They put this machine beneath Honoji and planned to use its mana to bring salvation to Japan. Specifically, they want to turn the singularity into Sukhavati, the paradise of Mahayana Buddhism. Despite what Maxwell represents, his noble phantasm isn't truly a perpetual motion machine. This is because Logos React Generic is unable to simulate such an infinite concept. As such, while it generates far more mana than it needs to operate, it still does need a steady supply of its own. To provide this mana, the cult abducts children and uses them to power the machine. Is paradise worth that sacrifice? Seems like a conflict of interest to me. The event begins when Cha-Cha finds Logos React and brings it to Ritsuka. In the presence of Mashu, Nobunaga, Okita, and Li Shuen, the box absorbs all of them into the singularity. From here, everything goes to hell, as the singularity features 7 variations of Nobunaga who revived at Honoji and spread throughout Japan, each claiming their own territories. First, there's the Nobunaga we're familiar with. Then there's Oda Kiposhi, Nobunaga's younger self, brimming with the passion of conquest. Back then, she earned the nickname Fool of Owari before solidifying her reputation as a feared warlord. The Kaiser Nobunaga we met in the previous event returns, representing Nobu's more serious side, while her summer form lets loose in a ridiculous fashion. Then we have who calls himself the genuine Nobunaga, a male form that appears as one of Nobunaga's historical portraits. It's thought that this Nobu isn't from proper human history, but some kind of Lost Belt variant. Then we have Big Nobu, a glorified mini Nobu drawn in Keikenichi style. Above them all is an extremely OP Avenger version known as Demon King Nobunaga. She is an Avenger servant encompassing all the other Nobunaga possibilities into a single form. She is the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven, a glorified embodiment of people's fear and reverence toward her. To resolve this singularity, we've got to confront each and every one of them. Willing to help our cause is Nagao Kagetora, or Uesugi Kenshin, another warrior from the Sengoku period. It should go without saying that she's supposed to be a guy historically, but GudaGuda prefers them gender bends, as do I. In this one case, though, historians and novelists questioned her gender based on records and portraits. In life, she was the daimyo of Echigo Province and self-proclaimed avatar of Bishamonten, a Japanese god of war clad in armor. Bishamonten is a Buddhist guardian, often depicted at the entrance gate to temples. In over 70 battles, Kagetora maintained a winning streak, proving both her strength and tactical genius. This helped unite Echigo in the face of internal strife. During her travels, she claimed to have encountered the figure of Bishamonten wielding 8 swords, which inspired her to take on 8 different weapons, known as the armament of the Eightfold Blossom. Believing herself to be a god's avatar, she felt inhuman, never quite understanding human emotions. Her attempts to smile were just as intimidating as her spears and swords, such that even her own retainers feared her. It was enough to make others genuinely revere her as Bishamonten, and not just someone devoted to him. She fought against Nobunaga in life, but died of esophageal cancer before she could continue her assault. To start our campaign, we target the Nobunaga we've known all this time. After we defeat her, she reveals that while she's still on Caldea's side, her spirit origin was manipulated when she was summoned here. Fortunately, we've snapped her out of it and can proceed. Unfortunately, we get attacked by an armored servant. He is Mori Nagayoshi, the brother of Mori Ranmaru, who remained with Nobunaga during the attack on Honnoji. Despite the name, he was actually one of the Oda clan's warriors, and was so barbarically ruthless that he earned the title Demon Musashi. He was known for his violent temper, resulting in stories of him striking down guards for demanding he dismount and identify himself. Even when these orders came from Nobunaga, she chose to forgive him on the basis that it can't be helped. In his very first battle, he decapitated 27 soldiers and used their blood to paint his armor red. He was so bloodstained that his allies couldn't tell whether or not he was wounded. Despite his rage, he would never betray or turn a blade toward his lord. Still, even his allies felt a sense of relief when he died from a bullet. He was a samurai from the Sengoku, but his futuristic armor is a nod to his role in Fate Koha Ace, where he was given that armor by the military. It absorbs mana from his surroundings, helping him regenerate. Eventually, though, we damage him enough that he runs out of mana and nearly dies. Nobunaga, however, asks Ritsuka to save him with a command spell, and in doing so, we gain another ally. Going forward, we call our band of warriors the Caldea clan. When we traveled to Kaiser Nobu's domain, we were attacked by Okita, who was under the same effect Nobunaga was. All it takes is a good fight to set her straight again. Using fragments of the Singularity's Grail, the other Nobus can summon black mud giants like the one we fought in the previous event. Nonetheless, it fails to stop us from reclaiming the Kanto region from Kaiser. As for Kiposhi, she fights us alongside Li Shuen, but eventually we force the two of them to surrender and join our cause. Kiposhi informs us that all of the Nobunagas used to work for the Demon King, but became unsatisfied with how they were treated. This gives us some leverage in recruiting the big Nobu to our clan. Along the way, we also reunite with Hijikata. Outside the Singularity, Sion sends Ryoma, Izo, and Okita Alter as reinforcements. They get separated though, each ray-shifted to different coordinates. Ryoma manages to find our castle, just as we're attacked by a berserker servant named Shibata Katsuie. He was one of Nobunaga's trusted generals, who married her sister and became the stepfather of Cha-Cha. He made a number of mistakes he now regrets, such as allying with Nobukatsu during their feud and allowing his wife to be killed after Nobunaga's death. As a servant, he wants to do a better job of serving Nobunaga, but it becomes an issue of which Nobu to follow. Clearly not ours. We try to hold him off, only to discover he's practically invincible. Ryoma speculates that Shibata's noble phantasm must be linked to his advance on the battlefield. With each step forward, he becomes more powerful, but it also costs more mana. By letting him advance, he begins to disappear and is forced to return to his starting position. Thus, for as powerful as he is, he can't actually reach our castle, which seems like a major design flaw. We're best off cutting his mana supply at the source. In a comical fashion, we encounter the genuine Nobunaga and Owari, and apparently can't tell which one is the real one. We retreat, but apparently Nobukatsu has found his way to this singularity and takes the chance to poison genuine Nobu. Like an idiot, he then tries to attack our Nobunaga, but comes to his senses after getting his ass kicked. Moving on, we fight Swimsuit Nobunaga on the beaches of Suruga. Once defeated, she finally points us toward the greater conflict with the cult of Max. Right on cue, Maxwell himself shows up and tells us we need to cooperate and defeat the Demon King, who is trying to destroy Japan. As a sign of goodwill, Maxwell tells us the source of Shibata's mana is in the Oma region, and he even dispels the barrier surrounding it. There, we discover that Cha-Cha is the one supplying Shibata with mana. This makes sense, given how Shibata is absolutely obsessed with his stepdaughter. Yet again, we knock some sense into Cha-Cha through battle and proceed to finish off Shibata now that everyone's against him. Since that intel was solid, we trust Maxwell enough to focus our efforts on Demon King Nobunaga. Izo was supposed to come help us, but he got brainwashed into helping the Demon King instead. We plow through him to reach the Demon King's throne room. Upon defeating her, it seems our Nobunaga suddenly takes on her appearance. How strange. Turns out, Akechi Mitsuhide was summoned alongside the Demon King, and as her retainer, he explains to us that our Nobunaga has become a fusion of all her other selves. He tries to inform us that the Demon King was ultimately trying to stop the cult of Max, but then Maxwell himself shows up to make another peace offering. This winds up being a trap, and at their headquarters of Honoji, Makuzu and his minions imprison us. In a surprise twist, we learn that Maxwell actually despises his current noble phantasm. This flawed machine that needs child sacrifices is a far cry from what he's supposed to represent. As such, he's willing to help us destroy him and his creation. He breaks us out of jail and shows us to the device. To stop us, High Priest Makuzu has the device churn out countless black giants, forcing us to retreat to the surface. The noble phantasm itself turns into a black giant, serving as our final boss. Everyone we've met along the way teams up to help our ultimate Nobunaga slay the giant, resulting in High Priest Makuzu getting erased as an error in the simulation. While this solves the main conflict, the singularity can't resolve itself unless Nobu stays behind and dies in the fires of Honoji like she did in real life. We say our goodbyes, which winds up being pointless, as Nobunaga can easily be resummoned to Chaldea. The event has an epilogue, in which we realize that Okita Alter, who was sent to the Singularity as backup, wound up stuck in there without even finding us. She becomes trapped in the simulation by her own sword, Rengoku. This is because Rengoku saw Okita Alter sleeping soundly and thought it could maintain the Singularity with remnants of Maxwell so that she could have a nice, long rest. God damn it, we've got a world to save! So we break her free, and finally the event comes to an end. Now we've got servants like Mori and Nagao hanging out in the boiler room too. Okay, so for my sanity, it's time to wrap up for now. There are still 2 GudaGuda events in English, and I'll cover them in a follow-up video. Until then, let me know which version of Nobu is your favorite down in the comments below. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all our anime lore, discussions, and Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or a YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like spicy exclusive vids and early access.
As always, celebrate your fandom. I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: Video Gamer 75, Dante Pendragon, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Omagoden, Freebrick, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Olympian Doll, Link Pendrago, Observer Bellis, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, King Kobo, Scout, Andre Foster, Zamas Autonomous, Yukie Iros, Crow Kalem, Saul Soto, Sogai CH, Caitlin P, Vladimirovna, The Taz 96, Kengo X 77, Alistair Bernadotte, and Akakaza Yume. Thank you all so much.